All right, buckle up because we're going deep into some wild Antarctica theories today.
Sounds chilly.
You bet. Someone sent us this MP3 titled 100% Proof Antarctica is Not a Continent. What Antarctica doesn't want you to know about Antarctica.mp3.
Oh, wow. That's quite a title.
Yeah, talk about a red flag for conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
right? So, we're going to break it down and see if any of their proof actually holds up.
Always a good idea.
So, right off the bat, they claim certain flights in the southern hemisphere are completely fake.
Fake flights, huh? What routes are we talking about?
They specifically mention QF-27 from Sydney to Santiago, QF-64 Johannesburg to Perth, and then SA-280 also Johannesburg to Perth.
Interesting. And what's the basis for calling these flights fake?
Well, they even get super specific about flight durations, like saying Sydney to Santiago takes 12 hours and 40 minutes.
I see. And they're claiming this timing is somehow proof that the flights aren't real.
Basically, yeah. They say it doesn't fit their model of a flat Earth.
So the flat Earth theory is tied into this.
Oh, absolutely. This whole MP3 is basically one big argument for a flat Earth.
Gotcha. It's always interesting to see how these different conspiracy theories tend to intertwine.
Right, it's like they all feed off each other.
Exactly.
Anyway, they even bring up John Travolta attending the launch of that Sydney to Santiago flight as if his presence somehow validates their point.
Celebrities and airline promotions go way back. I wouldn't read too much into that.
But it gets wilder. They claim flight search websites were altered after their initial video exposing these fake flights went viral.
Classic conspiracy theory tactics suggesting powerful forces are suppressing the truth.
Exactly. And then hold on to your hats. They claim Antarctica doesn't exist as a continent at all.
Whoa, okay. So where do they think Antarctica went?
They say it's actually the outer rim of a flat Earth.
The outer rim.
There-
Okay. I'm curious to hear how they try to back that one up.
Well, they point to things like planes to Antarctica,
Planes without windows. Have they never heard of cargo planes or older research aircraft? Sometimes windows just aren't practical or necessary, especially in those kinds of environments.
but they completely dismiss any evidence suggesting Antarctica is a continent piece. Research stations, news reports, scientific studies, it all gets brushed aside.
That's a pretty common thread in conspiracy theories, rejecting any evidence that doesn't fit the narrative.
Yeah, it's like they're creating their own reality.
And speaking of creating realities, this MP3 gets into a whole conspiracy theory about Antarctic cruises being a scam.
Oh, yeah, this is where things take a turn for the bizarre.
A scam? In what way?
They point to those sky-high prices, $40,000 to $75,000, and suggest it's all a scheme to keep people away from Antarctica.
Antarctic tourism is expensive, no doubt. But a scam? Those prices likely reflect the challenges of operating in such an extreme environment, specialized ships, permits, safety measures, all that.
Yeah, but they went deep down the rabbit hole with this one. They claim they did some internet sleuthing and found 150 domains linked to the Polar Cruises website.
150 domains. That does seem a little excessive.
Right, they're calling it a monopoly controlling access to Antarctica.
While that many domains might raise an eyebrow, it could also just be a marketing strategy or indicate different types of expeditions they offer.
True, but then they found a negative review online about Polar Cruises, highlighting pressure tactics and a lack of support from the company.
One negative review doesn't exactly prove an entire industry is a scam.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are good and bad operators in any field.
I hear you. But to top it all off, they dug up a connection between Polar Cruises and NOAA.
NOAA, as in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
The one and only. They specifically mentioned Dr. Richard Spinrad, a former U.S. Navy researcher and Obama appointee.
It's not unusual for private companies and government agencies to collaborate on research in Antarctica. NOAA's involvement probably just indicates a legitimate scientific interest in the region.
But of course, this speaker spins it as further proof of a grand conspiracy.
Conspiracy theories often thrive on distrust of authority figures and institutions. Government agencies, scientists, anyone deemed official become suspect.
So are you saying they're basically twisting any connection to make it fit their narrative?
It definitely seems that way.
Yeah.
They're cherry-picking information and ignoring any alternative explanations that don't support their pre-existing beliefs.
All right, so we've got fake flights, a scam Antarctic cruise industry, and a shadowy government cover-up. What else could they possibly come up with?
Oh, you won't believe this. They actually claim that GPS is a big lie, a tool to maintain the globe lie, as they call it.
GPS. Seriously, how do they explain that one?
Well, they argue that GPS relies on ground-based tracking stations instead of satellites.
Ground-based stations, so like cell towers.
Something like that. They
Oh,
seem to think these stations can triangulate our location from the ground without the need for satellites.
but that just doesn't make sense. We've sent satellites into space. We can see them orbiting the Earth.
Right. The evidence for a satellite-based GPS system is pretty overwhelming, but this speaker is determined to fit everything into their flat Earth model.
So they're basically ignoring a mountain of evidence to cling to their theory.
Exactly. It's a classic example of confirmation bias. They're more likely to accept information that confirms their beliefs, no matter how flimsy the evidence.
Well, this is getting pretty deep. We've only just scratched the surface of this Antarctic conspiracy theory, and it's already clear that we're dealing with some pretty out there ideas.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, my friend. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive even deeper into their claims about GPS, the midnight sun, and the supposed truth about Antarctica. All right, so picking up where we left off, let's take a closer look at how the speaker tries to dismantle GPS.
Yeah, they were really hung up on it, weren't they?
Totally. And they spent a lot of time trying to convince us that those ground-based stations could somehow work like satellites.
But didn't they kind of gloss over some pretty big problems with that idea?
Oh yeah, for one, they seem to forget that signals can't travel through the Earth.
Right, so how would these ground stations track locations on the other side of the planet?
Exactly. And they completely ignored the fact that we have actual, pictures of satellites in space.
Yeah, we've seen them, we've launched them.
So their whole argument kind of falls apart when you consider the actual technology involved.
It's like they're building this whole theory based on a misunderstanding of basic physics.
Which is kind of a recurring theme here, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of their arguments stem from, well, a lack of scientific understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that can make it really easy to fall for these kinds of, outlandish claims.
Speaking of outlandish claims, remember how they were going on and on about the midnight sun?
Oh yeah, they were convinced that it somehow disproves the globe model.
But isn't the midnight sun just a natural consequence of the Earth's tilt?
Exactly. It's all about how the Earth's axis is tilted at about 23.5 degrees.
Which, of course, they conveniently ignored.
They cherry-picked information that seemed to support their view and just tossed aside anything that didn't.
So basically more confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias all the way. They even pointed to webcam footage from Antarctica, suggesting it was manipulated to hide the truth about the midnight sun.
Right. They were claiming things like fog or smoke were deliberately obscuring the sun in the footage.
But fog and smoke are pretty common in Antarctica, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a pretty harsh environment down there.
So to assume that it's always some kind of, orchestrated cover-up is a bit of a stretch.
They were really fixated on that letter too, remember? The one from someone claiming to have experienced 6 months of sunlight and 6 months of darkness in Antarctica.
Oh, yeah, and of course they dismissed it as a lie.
Even though it's a well-documented phenomenon.
Exactly. It's directly related to the Earth's tilt and its orbit around the sun. It's basic astronomy.
It's just frustrating how they just, reject any evidence that doesn't fit their narrative.
And that's a really dangerous way of thinking, isn't it? It closes you off to any possibility of learning or changing your mind.
Yeah, you end up trapped in your own echo chamber.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it becomes almost impossible to have a productive conversation or debate.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about GPS, the midnight sun, and how confirmation bias can really distort our perception of reality.
And yet we've still got more to unravel. In part 3, we'll delve deeper into the speaker's analysis of those fake flight paths and their attempts to explain away some pretty compelling evidence.
Stay with us, folks. This deep dive into Antarctic conspiracy theories is about to get even more interesting. Okay, so we're back for the final leg of our journey through this Antarctic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, let's see how they try to tie it all together.
Well, they keep circling back to those flight paths, insisting that the durations just don't add up on a globe.
Right, like that Sydney to Santiago flight. They were adamant that 12 hours and 40 minutes is way too short.
But we've talked about how flight times can vary, right? There are so many factors at play.
Exactly. Wind conditions, air traffic control, the specific route taken. It's not as simple as just looking at the distance on a map.
But they were presenting it as if the airlines are deliberately misleading us.
They also made a big deal about all those flights supposedly departing at the same time.
Yeah, as if it's some kind of coordinated deception.
But coordinated departures are actually pretty common, for things like connecting flights or air traffic control efficiency.
So again, they're taking something that's totally normal in the aviation industry and spinning it into a conspiracy.
Exactly. They're looking for patterns and connections where none really exist.
And then there's that whole thing about planes to Antarctica lacking windows. They just wouldn't let that one go.
Right, like it's the smoking gun that proves a massive cover-up.
But we already debunked that, didn't we?
Yeah, it's much more likely that those planes are designed without windows for practical reasons.
Mm.
Cargo planes, older research aircraft,
Mm.
it often comes down to weight and cost,
But they're so fixated on this idea that Antarctica is off limits to the public.
which, isn't entirely true. People can visit Antarctica. It's just expensive and logistically challenging.
Speaking of expensive, they went back to those Antarctic cruises, calling them a scam to keep people away from the truth.
Right, because a $40,000 cruise is totally a more effective way to control information than, say, the internet.
They even brought up those 150 domains linked to polar cruises again, claiming it's a monopoly.
But as we discussed, multiple domains could just be a marketing strategy or indicate different types of expeditions they offer.
And that negative review they found online, they were really trying to paint polar cruises as some shady organization.
But one negative review doesn't prove anything. There are bound to be dissatisfied customers in any industry.
And let's not forget about that supposed connection to NOAA. They were making it sound like a huge conspiracy.
But collaborations between private companies and government agencies are actually pretty common in Antarctic research.
So basically, they're taking normal, everyday occurrences and twisting them into evidence for their theory.
That's the heart of it, isn't it? They're seeing conspiracies where none exist.
It's like they're wearing these, conspiracy-tinted glasses that distort their view of reality.
Exactly, and that makes it really difficult to engage with their arguments in a meaningful way.
Well, after all that, they do admit that certain aspects of the flat Earth model, especially relating to Antarctica, still need more research.
That was actually kind of refreshing. A rare moment of intellectual honesty.
But even with that admission, they still maintain that Antarctica is the edge of a flat Earth and, everyone's lying to us.
It's a reminder that even when presented with contradictory evidence, some people will cling to their beliefs no matter what.
So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway from all this?
Well, I think it highlights the importance of critical thinking. We need to be careful about the information we consume and the sources we trust.
And we need to be willing to question our own assumptions and biases.
Absolutely. We all have biases, but it's important to be aware of them and to, try to be objective in our evaluation of information.
This whole deep dive has been a wild ride, hasn't it? From fake flights to GPS manipulation to the midnight sun conspiracy.
It's been a fascinating exploration of how these theories take shape and how they can, really capture people's imaginations.
But it's also been a reminder that we need to be vigilant. We need to be critical thinkers and not just accept everything we hear at face value.
Exactly. We need to be our own fact checkers and, rely on credible sources and evidence-based reasoning.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds sharp.
And remember, the truth is out there, but it takes effort to find it.
Until next time, stay curious and stay skeptical. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Antarctic conspiracy theories.